She thought it was just another parking spot. She thought no one would challenge her arrogance. But when a racist woman hijacked a handicapped space meant for an elderly black couple, she never expected Big Shaq to step in. What followed wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. A moment that would expose privilege, demand accountability, and ignite a nationwide conversation. The question is, when injustice unfolds, will you step up or stay silent? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where you're watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun shone brightly over the Ridgewood Shopping Center, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The weekend rush was in full swing, cars moving in and out, people hurrying with shopping bags, and the hum of conversations blending into the occasional honk of impatient drivers. Among them, William and Gloria Thompson moved carefully through the crowded lot, their old sedan crawling at a slow pace. William, in his late 70s, had trouble walking, his cane resting between his knees as he focused on finding a handicapped parking space. Gloria, his wife of 50 years, sat beside him, scanning the rows of cars with a patient but concerned expression. "There's one, Bill," Gloria said, pointing ahead. Just a few spots down, a blue-marked handicapped space sat open, waiting for them. William nodded, gripping the steering wheel as he maneuvered toward it. His hands, weathered from decades of hard work, tightened as he carefully aligned the car. Then, out of nowhere, a sleek white luxury SUV swerved into the space. William's foot slammed on the brake. Gloria let out a small gasp, her eyes widening as the SUV jerked to a halt right in front of them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the driver's door swung open, and out stepped a woman who looked no older than 30. Vanessa Carter, blonde, tall, draped in designer clothes, with oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, moved with an air of entitlement. She barely glanced at the car she had just cut off. Instead, she adjusted her sunglasses, checked her reflection in the side mirror, and slung her expensive handbag over her shoulder. William's jaw tightened. He rolled down his window, his voice steady but strained. "Excuse me, ma'am, but this is a handicapped spot. We were about to park here." Vanessa turned, tilting her head as if she were just now noticing them. Then, she let out a small, amused chuckle. "Oh," she said with a smirk. "Yeah, I saw you guys creeping up, but, first come, first serve." Gloria's face fell. "But my husband can't walk far. That's why we need the space." Vanessa sighed dramatically, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Look, lady, I'm in a rush. I need to run in real quick and I'll be right back." William's hands gripped the steering wheel. "That's not how this works. That spot is for people who need it." Vanessa shrugged. "Well, I need it too. I'm wearing heels and walking all the way from the back lot. Not happening." Gloria inhaled sharply, her voice shaking with disbelief. That's not the same thing at all." Vanessa scoffed. She waved her hand dismissively and started walking toward the store entrance. "You people always make everything about yourselves." The words hit like a slap. Gloria's breath caught in her throat. William's grip on the wheel tightened. A few nearby shoppers slowed their steps, sensing the tension, but no one said a word. Then, a new shadow stretched across the pavement. A towering figure stood a few feet away, watching. Shaquille O'Neal. Dressed casually in a gray hoodie and jeans, Shaq had been leaning against his black truck nearby, sipping a smoothie and minding his own business. Until now. His deep brown eyes, hidden behind dark shades, had been watching the exchange unfold. His relaxed posture had stiffened the moment he heard Vanessa's last remark. But he didn't move. Not yet. Instead, he simply watched. The tension in the parking lot thickened. The air felt heavier. More people had noticed the growing confrontation, but as usual, most bystanders chose silence. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others pulled out their phones, recording, waiting to see what would happen next. Vanessa, still oblivious, strutted toward the entrance without a second thought. William sighed, defeated. "Gloria, let's just park somewhere else." Gloria turned to him, heartbreak flickering across her face. "But you—" "It's fine," he muttered, shifting the car into reverse. But it wasn't fine. Not by a long shot. And Shaq knew it. As William backed away, Shaq finally straightened. His massive 7 feet 1 inch frame cast a shadow over the lot as he took a single step forward. The moment was subtle, but the energy shifted. The crowd watched, and for the first time, Vanessa noticed him. She paused at the entrance, her manicured fingers still clutching her purse. She turned slightly, catching Shaq's silent, unreadable gaze. Her smirk faltered. Shaq said nothing, but his presence alone spoke volumes. A storm was brewing. And Vanessa Carter? She had no idea what was coming. Gloria stepped out of the car, her hands trembling as she moved toward Vanessa. Her heart ached, not just from the frustration of losing the parking spot, but from the humiliation of being dismissed so easily. She had been raised to believe that if you treated people with kindness, they would return it. But this woman, this stranger who didn't even need the space, was proving just how cruel the world could be. "Please," Gloria said, her voice firm yet pleading. "My husband can barely walk. That spot is for people like him. You could park anywhere else." Vanessa, who had been scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. She let out a mocking laugh, shaking her head. "Oh my God, are we still on this?" she scoffed. "Lady, do you know how entitled you sound? Crying over a parking spot like the world owes you something?" Gloria flinched, her lips pressing together. "We don't want anything but fairness," she said softly. Vanessa smirked. "Fairness? Please. You people always play the victim." A hush fell over the lot. A few heads turned. Someone gasped. Gloria felt a cold weight settle in her chest. William, still in the driver's seat, clenched the steering wheel. His hands, once strong enough to build homes, fix cars, and hold his grandchildren, now trembled with age. He reached for his cane, trying to steady himself, but his knuckles had turned white from gripping it so hard. A few feet away, Shaquille O'Neal stood motionless, his expression unreadable behind his dark sunglasses. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, but he was watching and listening. The growing crowd had noticed him by now. A couple of young guys whispered, nudging each other. One even pulled out his phone, nudging the guy next to him. "Is that Shaq?" Shaq ignored them. His focus was on Vanessa and the Thompsons. Meanwhile, Gloria inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay calm. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Vanessa interrupted, rolling her eyes. "You're mad that I got here first, and now you're trying to make it a race thing." Gloria's breath caught in her throat. "I never said—" Vanessa held up a manicured hand. "Spare me the fake outrage. Seriously, people like you always act like victims." Gloria took a step back, her face pale. She turned to William, who was slowly trying to get out of the car. His knee buckled the second he put weight on it. Gloria rushed to his side, trying to steady him. "Bill, be careful," he grunted, gripping the car door for support. His old injury from years of working on construction sites had left his right leg weak, and walking long distances was exhausting. Vanessa let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh my God, why are you making this so dramatic? If you two are so fragile, maybe you shouldn't be out here by yourselves." The words cut deep. Gloria turned, fire flashing in her eyes. "How dare you?" William placed a gentle hand on his wife's arm. "Let it go," he murmured. But he shouldn't have had to say that. He shouldn't have had to let it go. The silence was thick. And then, a shadow moved. A massive, unmistakable shadow. Shaq took one slow step forward, then another. His black sneakers scraped against the pavement as he moved with deliberate, unhurried power. Heads turned. More phones went up. Vanessa noticed him now. Her confident smirk flickered, just for a second. But she held her ground, crossing her arms. Shaq stopped just beside the Thompsons. For a moment, he simply stood there, towering over Vanessa's luxury SUV like a skyscraper casting shade over a cheap building. He finally spoke, his voice deep, slow, and unmistakably serious. "You got a problem with them?" Vanessa let out a small, nervous laugh. "Whoa. Okay. Didn't know this was a whole thing." Shaq didn't blink. "It's a thing now." Vanessa's lips parted. then pressed into a tight line. The crowd grew. Someone whispered, "Oh, she messed with the wrong guy." Gloria looked up at Shaq, her expression caught between gratitude and disbelief. William sighed, steadying himself. "Sir, it's not worth it. People like her, they don't change." Shaq turned his head slightly, acknowledging William with a nod. "Yeah, I've met people like her before." He turned back to Vanessa. "But see, here's the thing. I don't let people like her slide." Vanessa squared her shoulders. "Excuse me?" Shaq removed his sunglasses slowly, tucking them into the collar of his hoodie. His deep brown eyes locked onto hers. "I said," he repeated, "I don't let people like you slide." For the first time since this all began, Vanessa looked genuinely unsure. She glanced around, noticing the crowd had doubled. People were filming. Whispers spread. She had thought this was just another small moment where she could get away with being selfish and cruel. But now the world was watching. She had no idea what was coming next. Shaq took another slow step forward, his massive frame blocking out the morning sun as he loomed over Vanessa's pristine white SUV. The tension in the air thickened, the quiet murmur of the gathered crowd turning into something heavier, something expectant. Vanessa adjusted her sunglasses, tilting her head as if she wasn't impressed, but her posture had stiffened just slightly. She was used to getting away with things, used to people backing down when she pushed hard enough. Shaq, however, wasn't moving. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Do the right thing and move your car." Vanessa let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "Oh wow, we're really doing this?" She gestured toward the Thompsons, her manicured fingers flicking in their direction. "I told them I'm only gonna be a minute. They can park somewhere else." Shaq didn't blink. They shouldn't have to. Vanessa sighed dramatically, looking around as if searching for someone, anyone who would back her up. "This is so ridiculous," she muttered. "It's a parking spot, people. There are plenty of others." A man in the crowd, a middle-aged guy in a baseball cap, spoke up. "Then why don't you take one of those other spots?" Vanessa shot him a glare. "Excuse me, do I even know you?" The man raised his hands. "Just saying." A woman near him nodded. "Yeah, just move the car. It's a handicapped spot. It's not that deep." Vanessa folded her arms, rolling her eyes. "Oh my God, y'all are acting like I ran over a puppy." Shaq's expression remained steady, but the silence around him was growing louder. Vanessa felt the shift, but wasn't ready to let go of her control just yet. She let out a breath, putting on her best condescending voice. "Look, sir," she started, glancing up at Shaq. "Shaq," he corrected. She blinked. "Huh?" "My name's Shaq," he repeated, his voice still calm. A flicker of recognition crossed Vanessa's face. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Shaq caught it. She knew exactly who he was. And yet, instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Okay, Shaq," she said, emphasizing his name mockingly. "I get that you want to be the hero here, but this really isn't a big deal. I parked first. That's how it works. First come, first serve." Shaq exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Nah, that's not how it works." Vanessa scoffed. "Oh, so what? Because they're old, they automatically get to take whatever they want." She waved a hand, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. That's fair." William, still standing by the car, visibly winced. Gloria's hands curled into small fists, and Shaq's jaw tightened. A few people in the crowd murmured uncomfortably. The air shifted, a storm brewing just under the surface. Then Vanessa let out a small, smug laugh and added, "I mean, why am I even surprised? People like you guys always expect everything handed to you." A collective gasp rippled through the bystanders. Someone muttered, "Oh, she did not just say that." Shaq's expression didn't change, but the energy around him did. It was as if the entire parking lot had gone still. No one moved. No one breathed. Vanessa, still oblivious, smirked. "What? You know I'm right." Then Shaq finally spoke. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "What exactly do you think got handed to me?" Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, come on. You're rich. You're famous. I mean, what do you even have to complain about? Shaq nodded as if he had expected that response. You think money erases everything? Vanessa rolled her eyes. I think money means you don't have to whine about a parking spot. Shaq took one step closer, and for the first time, Vanessa stepped back. He leaned down slightly, just enough that his presence became even more imposing. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver, but when he spoke, it felt like the ground itself was listening. Do you know how many people told me I'd never make it? He asked. Do you know how many doors were shut in my face before I got here? Vanessa swallowed but kept her arms crossed. Shaq nodded toward the Thompsons. Do you know how many times they've been ignored, stepped over, treated like they don't belong? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. I don't know them. That's the problem, Shaq said. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh, trying to regain control. Look, I'm not racist if that's what you're implying. I just think people like you. Shaq's eyebrows raised slightly. People like me? Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The entire crowd was watching now, no longer just observers but witnesses. Vanessa's confidence wavered. She turned to glance at the people recording on their phones. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. But she still wasn't ready to admit she was wrong. The tension was unbearable. Then, out of nowhere, a voice broke the silence. Yo, Vanessa, someone called. Vanessa turned sharply. A young man, maybe in his mid-20s, stood near the back of the crowd shaking his head. I know you, he said. We went to high school together. You used to do this same stuff back then. Always thought the rules didn't apply to you. A few people murmured. Vanessa visibly stiffened. I don't even know who you are. The guy chuckled. Oh, you do. He gestured to Shaq. And you're really trying this with him? Girl, you picked the wrong day. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face flushed red. Shaq didn't laugh. He just stood there, waiting. For a moment, Vanessa seemed like she was about to say something else. Another excuse, another argument. But then, for the first time, she hesitated. Her fingers twitched against the strap of her purse. She glanced at the cameras, then at Shaq. Then, finally, at the Thompsons. William, still holding onto his car for support, met her gaze. He didn't look angry, just tired. Vanessa shifted on her feet, and then very slowly she let out a small breath. Fine, she muttered. She turned, stormed to her car, and threw open the door. The crowd watched in silence as she climbed in, slammed it shut, and after a long pause, finally reversed out of the space. Shaq didn't move, didn't say anything. He simply turned to William and Gloria. Take your spot, he said softly. William looked up at him, something unreadable in his eyes. Then, with slow, careful movements, he nodded. Thank you, son. Shaq nodded back. As the Thompsons pulled into their rightful space, the crowd erupted into applause. Vanessa sped off, her face burning with humiliation. But the moment wasn't about her anymore. It was about the people who had finally been seen. Shaq watched her car disappear, then exhaled, slipping his sunglasses back on. Y'all have a good day, he murmured, and with that, he walked away. The sound of Vanessa's car door slamming shut echoed across the lot as she sped off, tires screeching slightly against the pavement. The tension in the air lingered, but now it had shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. People looked at each other, shaking their heads. Some laughed, some whispered, but the moment wasn't over just yet. Not for Shaq, not for Vanessa, not for the dozens of phones still recording. Shaq stood there for a moment, watching Vanessa's car disappear down the street. Then slowly, he turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. Y'all got all that, right? He asked, his voice smooth and steady. A few people chuckled. Several lifted their phones higher, confirming they were still recording. One man, maybe in his late 40s, shook his head. Man, that lady's gonna regret that in about 5 minutes. Shaq exhaled, slipping his sunglasses back on. Yeah, he said, nodding. She will. Gloria still stood beside their car, watching everything unfold with cautious eyes. William, now safely parked in the handicapped spot he had been rightfully entitled to, placed his cane on the pavement and exhaled deeply, like he had been holding in a breath for years. "Are we good here, sir?" he asked, his voice steady but tired. Shaq turned, nodding respectfully. "Yeah, Mr. Thompson, you're good." But just as things seemed to settle, a voice cut through the air. "Wait a minute." Everyone turned. A young woman in her mid-20s, wearing a store uniform with a manager's badge clipped to her shirt, stood near the shopping center entrance. Her arms were crossed, her expression curious but sharp. She gestured toward the corner of the parking lot, where a security camera was mounted high on a pole, blinking red. "You know," she said, stepping forward, "this whole place is under 24-hour surveillance." The crowd stilled. Shaq turned slightly toward her. "Come again?" She pointed at the camera again. "The security system records everything, and I mean everything, in this parking lot." A murmur rippled through the people standing around. "Hold up," someone said. "You mean that lady's whole tantrum is on official footage too?" The manager smirked. "Oh yeah, it's all there, from the moment she stole the spot to the moment she embarrassed herself." The entire energy shifted. People were no longer just bystanders to a viral moment. Now there was evidence. Shaq raised an eyebrow, adjusting his hoodie. "That footage available to the public?" The manager shrugged. "Not usually, but I could always, pull it up real quick." Gloria, who had been silent until now, suddenly straightened. "Young lady," she said, stepping closer, her voice calm but sharp. "Are you saying we could see the footage right now?" The manager smirked. "I might be saying that." A buzz of excitement spread through the small crowd. Shaq glanced at William, who was now watching intently. Then he looked back at the manager, nodding once. "Well," Shaq said, "let's see it." The store manager led them inside, where a security kiosk sat near the entrance. A few employees gathered, curious about what was happening, whispering among themselves. The screen was already on, multiple small camera angles filling the display. The manager grabbed the mouse, clicking through feeds until she landed on the one covering the handicapped parking spaces. She rewound. And then, there it was. On the grainy black and white footage, Vanessa's white SUV came into view, cutting in front of the Thompsons' car, stealing the spot before they could park. Someone whistled. Man, she really did that like it was nothing. The video played forward. It showed everything. Vanessa's dismissive attitude, her mocking laughter, her arrogant stance, and, most damning of all, the moment she spat out the words. "You people always expect everything handed to you." A collective silence fell over the group watching. Someone muttered, "Damn, that's worse than I thought." Another whispered, "Oh, she's done for." Shaq, arms crossed, exhaled slowly through his nose. The video wasn't just proof, it was a full-blown exposure. And Vanessa? She had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, outside in the parking lot, Vanessa had parked her car in another spot, still fuming. She sat in the driver's seat, phone in her hand, texting furiously. She wasn't texting an apology. She wasn't reflecting. She was ranting about how unfair it was, about how ridiculous people were, and about how she wasn't going to be bullied just because people love playing victim. Her fingers flew across the screen, the anger in her chest blinding her to the reality of the moment. Then, her phone buzzed. A notification popped up. New video. Entitled, "Karen Gets Shut Down by Shaq After Stealing Disabled Parking Spot." Vanessa blinked. The thumbnail? A frozen frame of her smirking at Shaq, just before she made the comment that sealed her fate. Her heart stopped. Her fingers trembled as she clicked the video. It had already been uploaded. And worse, it had already gone viral. Back inside, Shaq turned to Gloria and William. "Y'all want to keep this video?" Gloria, who had spent so many years ignored, whose husband had been disrespected in broad daylight, nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "I do." William, ever the quiet and dignified one, simply sighed. "Not for revenge," he said. "But so she learns." Shaq nodded. "I respect that." The store manager grinned. I'll make sure you get a copy. Just then, another notification popped up on one of the employees' phones. They gasped. Yo, this is already blowing up, like, big time. Shaq smirked. Told you she was gonna regret that in 5 minutes. William let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Guess it happened in 4. The group laughed. But outside, Vanessa's world was starting to crumble, and she wasn't ready, not even close. Vanessa gripped the steering wheel of her SUV, her fingers tightening as her phone continued to vibrate with incoming notifications. The video was spreading fast. Each buzz sent a chill down her spine. She swallowed hard, scrolling through the comments. This is disgusting. She really thought she could get away with this? Shaq handled that better than I ever could. The internet never forgets, Vanessa. Her stomach churned. This wasn't just some minor argument in a parking lot anymore. This was a public reckoning. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. She had to fix this. But as soon as she stepped out of her car, the air felt different. The moment her heels hit the pavement, all eyes turned toward her. The once small crowd had doubled, and a strange quiet had settled over them. No one was yelling. No one was mocking her. They were just watching, waiting. And standing at the center of it all was Shaquille O'Neal, arms crossed, posture relaxed, but eyes locked onto her with unshakable focus. Vanessa's throat tightened. She wasn't in control anymore. She let out a slow breath, forcing a tight smile. Okay, I think this has gotten a little out of hand. Shaq tilted his head slightly. You think so? Vanessa let out a nervous chuckle. I mean, come on. It's just a parking spot. Do we really need to turn this into some big social justice moment? Shaq didn't blink. Is that what you think this is? She shifted her weight, crossing her arms. I think people are overreacting. I parked before they did. Simple as that. Shaq nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then, in a calm, measured voice, he asked, What do you see when you look at them? Vanessa frowned. What? Shaq gestured toward William and Gloria, who stood side by side near their car. William's hands rested on his cane, his weathered face unreadable. Gloria's arms were crossed, her jaw tight, her eyes unwaveringly locked on Vanessa. What do you see? Shaq repeated. Vanessa glanced at them, uncomfortable. I don't know, just an old couple. Shaq nodded again. An old couple, that's all? Vanessa shrugged, looking around as if searching for backup. I don't know what answer you want from me. Shaq exhaled, taking a step closer. His voice remained steady, controlled. The problem is, you never saw them at all. Vanessa's lips parted slightly. You didn't see William struggling to walk, Shaq continued. You didn't see Gloria trying to help him. You didn't see two people who have lived decades of life, worked hard, raised a family, paid their dues, just trying to get through the damn day with a little dignity. Vanessa flinched. You only saw yourself, Shaq said. The crowd remained silent, hanging onto every word. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. That's not true. Shaq arched an eyebrow. No? She let out a frustrated sigh. Look, I was in a hurry, okay? I needed the spot for a few minutes and I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. Shaq nodded again, like he had expected that answer. Then he leaned forward slightly and asked, Then why did you have to humiliate them? Vanessa blinked. I didn't. Why did you mock them? Shaq pressed. Why did you laugh? Why did you tell them to stop playing victim? Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. The crowd shifted, eyes darting between them. She swallowed hard, glancing at Gloria and William again. For the first time, she really looked at them. William's grip on his cane was tight, but he was standing tall, his gaze steady. Gloria's eyes were still locked on her, but there was no hatred in them. Just disappointment. The kind of disappointment that hits deeper than anger ever could. Vanessa's breath hitched. Shaq let the silence stretch before finally speaking again. This isn't about a parking spot, he said. Vanessa exhaled sharply. Then what is it about? Shaq's expression hardened. It's about respect. She flinched. Shaq gestured around. You want to know why people are mad? Why they're recording? It's not just because you took a space that wasn't yours. He took another step forward. It's because you took their dignity with it. Vanessa's face burned. That's not. You laughed at them. You dismissed them. You acted like they didn't deserve to be seen. Shaq's voice never rose. It didn't need to. Vanessa's defenses were crumbling on their own. The crowd remained frozen, every person absorbing the weight of the moment. Shaq sighed. And the sad part is, I don't even think you realize what you did. Vanessa swallowed hard. You want to know what racism looks like? Shaq interrupted, his voice quieter now. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. It's not just slurs, Shaq said. It's not just the big loud stuff. He gestured toward the footage still visible on a bystander's phone screen. It's this. Vanessa's heart pounded. It's thinking your time is more important than theirs, Shaq continued. It's thinking your convenience matters more than their struggle. Another pause. Then Shaq's final words came out slow, steady, and sharp. It's looking at them and thinking, they don't matter. Vanessa felt the words hit. Her fingers curled into fists. Her stomach twisted. Because deep down, she knew he was right. For the first time since this entire situation started, Vanessa was at a loss for words. The crowd stood still, watching, waiting. Gloria shifted slightly, letting out a slow breath. William adjusted his cane but said nothing. Shaq finally took a step back. His expression softened, but only slightly. Now, he said, I'm going to ask you one last time. Vanessa swallowed, bracing herself. Was it just a parking spot? Silence. Long, suffocating silence. Vanessa wanted to fight back. She wanted to cling to the arrogance, the entitlement, the shield she had built around herself. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Her shoulders sagged. Her lips parted, but her voice was barely a whisper. No. Shaq nodded once. Vanessa looked at Gloria and William again, and for the first time, her expression wasn't defensive. It wasn't smug. It was something else. Something closer to shame. She inhaled shakily. Then, with a voice that was no longer dripping with arrogance, she whispered, I'm sorry. A hush fell over the crowd. Shaq studied her for a long moment, then nodded again. Now do better. Vanessa looked away, her face burning. The lesson was over, but she would never forget it. Vanessa crossed her arms, rolling her eyes as if none of this mattered. She glanced around at the gathered crowd, her smug expression still intact. Whatever, she muttered, flicking her hair over her shoulder. I don't have time for this. Before she could step away, a voice cut through the murmurs. Excuse me, miss? A uniformed security officer approached, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that immediately commanded attention. The name tag on his chest read, Officer Daniels, and he looked like a man who had dealt with more than a few entitled troublemakers in his time. Vanessa barely acknowledged him, already irritated. Oh great, what now? She scoffed. Officer Daniels didn't blink. We need to have a word. The air around them shifted, the crowd quieted. Even Shaq, who had been watching Vanessa's unraveling with a measured calm, slightly tilted his head. Vanessa sighed dramatically. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. Daniels held up a hand, silencing her. I've seen the footage. The security cameras recorded everything, from the moment you took their parking space to the moment you started hurling insults. His voice was steady, professional, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. For the first time, Vanessa's confidence wavered. Her eyes darted to the parking lot cameras, small black domes mounted on poles. She hadn't considered that. You can't be serious, she said, forcing a laugh. This is just a parking spot. You people are acting like I committed a crime. Daniels didn't waver. Miss Carter, this isn't just about a parking spot. It's about your behavior. And from what I've seen, this isn't the first time you've caused a disturbance in a public space. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people exchanged knowing looks. A woman near the back whispered to her friend, I knew she looked familiar. Vanessa blinked rapidly. Excuse me? Daniels pulled a small notepad from his pocket. We've had complaints about you before, harassing store employees, arguing with customers, causing scenes when things don't go your way. Today just confirmed a pattern. Vanessa's face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she had no quick comeback. Then, the final blow came. "We've spoken to the store manager," Daniels continued. "Effective immediately. You're banned from this shopping center. Indefinitely." Gasps echoed through the parking lot. Even Vanessa seemed stunned into silence. She shook her head, laughing in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Daniels remained firm. "You have 5 minutes to leave the premises, or I'll have to escort you myself." Vanessa turned sharply to the store entrance, as if expecting someone to come rushing to her defense. But no one did. The employees watching from inside didn't look surprised. They just stood there, arms crossed, as if they'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Reality hit her like a slap. She wasn't in control anymore. Panic flickered in her eyes. She turned to Shaq. "You can't let them do this." Her voice, once so sharp and full of arrogance, now held a waver of desperation. This whole thing is your fault. You could have let it go." Shaq exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Nah, this was all you." His voice was calm, unwavering. "Actions have consequences." Vanessa clenched her fists. "But..." Shaq lifted a hand, cutting her off. "You had chances to do the right thing, to fix this before it got this far." He gestured to the people watching, to the security cameras, to the very moment she had created. "You made your choice." The power had completely shifted. The woman who had stood with so much entitlement now stood with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes flicking to the crowd once more. But she saw no allies, no one to back her up, no one who cared enough to save her from this. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to be powerless, and she hated it. Wordlessly, she turned on her heel and stormed toward her car. The crowd parted, watching her go, the weight of justice settling over the parking lot. Vanessa Carter had finally been held accountable. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind of heavy silence that carried weight, the kind that made people reflect on what they had just witnessed. Vanessa's car disappeared out of the parking lot, leaving behind an air of unease. The crowd, which had been nothing more than a passive audience just moments ago, now stood at a crossroads, silent observers or voices of change. A woman in her mid-40s, wearing a beige trench coat and clutching her purse tightly, stepped forward hesitantly. Her eyes flickered with guilt. I wanted to say something," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw what was happening, and I wanted to step in, but I was afraid. I didn't know if it was my place." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I should have done something." Shaq turned to her, his gaze kind but firm. "You still can." His voice was steady, carrying an unshakable strength. "It's never too late to speak up. You don't have to be loud, you don't have to fight. Sometimes just standing beside the right people is enough." The woman nodded, her face still full of regret. But there was something else now, a quiet determination, as if this moment had sparked something in her. Another voice rose from the back. "This kind of thing happens all the time." A young black man in his 20s stepped forward, his arms crossed over his chest. "Maybe not always this obvious, but we see it. People cutting in line, talking down to us, treating us like we don't belong." His jaw tightened. "And we're just supposed to take it." A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair shook his head. "It's disgusting. I can't believe people still act like this in broad daylight." He looked around, eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. "But you know what? I'm guilty too. Not of doing it, but of ignoring it. Walking past it, thinking, well, that's not my problem. But it is." A young woman holding her phone, who had been recording parts of the confrontation, hesitated before speaking. "I filmed it," she admitted, glancing at Shaq. "I wanted people to see, but I didn't say anything while it was happening." She swallowed hard. "I guess I thought filming was enough." Shaq studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Raising awareness is important," he acknowledged. "But real change happens when people don't just watch. When they act," he let that sink in before continuing. "Not everyone has to step in the way I did. But silence lets people like Vanessa believe they can get away with it. And when enough people let things slide, nothing ever changes. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The weight of inaction, the guilt of standing by. It settled over the crowd like a shared burden. And yet, in that burden, there was also the spark of something new. An older woman, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, spoke up next. "I've lived a long time," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of years. "I've seen how things used to be, and I've seen how things still are. Change doesn't happen because we wait for it. It happens because we make it happen." She turned her sharp gaze on the crowd. "So what are we gonna do?" The energy shifted again. People murmured in agreement, nodding, exchanging glances. For the first time, they weren't just a group of strangers who had witnessed an incident. They were a community, realizing their collective power. A teenager, no older than 16, raised his hand hesitantly. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, looking directly at Shaq. "But I want to help. I don't want to just stand there next time." Shaq gave him a small nod of approval. That's the first step. The moment stretched, filled with the weight of realization, of shared responsibility. And then, someone started clapping. It was slow at first, hesitant, but it spread. One by one, hands met hands, a steady rhythm of acknowledgement, not just for Shaq, but for everyone who had found their voice in that parking lot. Gloria, who had been holding on to William's arm, finally spoke, her voice warm but strong. "This wasn't just about us," she said, looking around at the gathered faces. "This was about all of us, about how we treat each other, about what we allow." William, who had been silent for most of the ordeal, finally smiled. "And about what we refuse to allow anymore." Shaq took a deep breath, letting the moment settle before speaking one last time. "Change starts small," he said, scanning the faces around him. "It starts right here, with every single one of us deciding that we won't look away anymore." His gaze lingered on the young teen. "That we won't be afraid to do the right thing." No one looked away. Not this time. Vanessa's heels clicked against the pavement as she stormed toward her car, her shoulders tense, her breathing uneven. The arrogance that once dripped from her words had drained away, replaced by something more uncertain, more fragile. But she wouldn't let them see it. Not them. Not Shaq. Not the crowd still watching her every move. She reached for her car door handle, gripping it tightly, her knuckles turning white. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was Vanessa Carter. She had always gotten her way. People either feared her, tolerated her, or ignored her tantrums altogether. But today she had lost. Before she could open the door, Shaq's voice cut through the air, calm but unshakable. "Vanessa." Her fingers froze on the handle. A muscle in her jaw twitched, but she didn't turn around. "What you do next is what defines you." The words hit her like a gust of wind, knocking against the fragile walls of her ego. The crowd had quieted, the energy shifting again, from outrage to something else, something heavier. They weren't just waiting to see her leave. They were waiting to see if she would change. She exhaled sharply, her nails tapping against the metal of her car. "You think one moment changes everything?" she muttered, her voice lower now, lacking its usual bite. Shaq didn't move. "I think every moment gives us a choice." The weight of those words settled into her bones. A choice. She had made 1,000 choices today, each one pushing her deeper into humiliation, deeper into the reality that she wasn't untouchable. And now, she had one last one to make. Slowly, as if moving through thick air, she turned to face them. The people she had dismissed, belittled, mocked. The people who had, in the end, won. Gloria stood beside William, her expression unreadable but not cruel. The old man, the one she had laughed at, simply watched her with tired eyes. The teenager who had admitted he wanted to do better stared at her now, waiting. And Shaq. Shaq was still standing there, unmoved, unreadable, but unwavering in his presence. The words lodged in her throat like stones. Apologizing had never been in her vocabulary. Owning up to mistakes, admitting she was wrong, that was foreign territory. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Every fiber of her being told her to just get in her car and leave. to pretend none of this mattered, that she didn't care. But she did. She had lost control today, not just of the situation, but of herself. And for the first time, she saw it. The way people recoiled when she spoke, the exhaustion in their eyes, the quiet, simmering anger of those who had seen too many people like her before. Her heart pounded. Her pride screamed at her to keep walking. But then, a flicker of something, an unfamiliar discomfort settled in her chest. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. A pause. The longest pause of her life. The crowd leaned in slightly, holding their breath. She clenched her fists, then unclenched them. Finally, her voice, quieter than before, came out. I didn't think... She exhaled sharply. I didn't think it was a big deal. Her gaze flickered to Gloria, then to William. But maybe it was. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people crossed their arms, unimpressed. Others exchanged glances, unsure of whether to believe her. Shaq said nothing. He was giving her space to finish this on her own. Vanessa shifted on her feet, suddenly aware of how small she felt. She had spent her entire life making others feel this way, powerless, insignificant, unheard. And now, here she was. I shouldn't have taken your spot, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And I shouldn't have said what I said. Gloria studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. No, you shouldn't have. Vanessa winced at the sharpness of those words, but she didn't argue. For once, she had no excuses. The young teenager, the one who had asked Shaq how to help, took a step forward. So, what now? He asked, his voice hesitant. Shaq finally spoke. That's up to her. His gaze met Vanessa's. What kind of person do you want to be? The question settled into her ribs, pressing against the walls she had built for so long. She looked away, her pulse pounding in her ears. I don't know, she admitted. And for the first time all day, she meant it. The crowd didn't cheer. There was no applause, no grand moment of forgiveness. Just silence, heavy and real. Vanessa nodded to herself, then turned back to her car. But this time, when she reached for the handle, she hesitated. Not out of anger or stubbornness, but because she knew. This wasn't the end of it. Not for them. Not for her. And as she got into her car and drove away, she felt it for the first time. The weight of consequences, the burden of choice, and the unfamiliar sting of regret. The parking lot had never felt so quiet. The tension that had once crackled through the air like an unspoken challenge had now settled into something else. Something calmer, something heavier, something that left everyone standing there a little different than before. William sighed deeply, his old hands gripping his cane as he looked at the now empty parking space. Gloria, standing beside him, patted his arm gently, her face soft with relief. Come on, honey, she said. Let's get you to the car. Shaq took a step forward. Allow me. Without hesitation, he moved to open the passenger side door, his massive hands careful as he helped guide William into his seat. Thank you, son, William murmured, adjusting himself with a small wince. This world needs more folks like you. Shaq chuckled lightly. Just doing what's right. Gloria turned to Shaq, looking up at him with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. I hope you know what you did today wasn't just about us, she said. It was about everyone who's ever been stepped on, disrespected, ignored. Shaq nodded, but he didn't say much. He didn't need to. As the Thompsons settled into their car, the crowd that had gathered slowly began to disperse. Some people left in silence, their minds turning over what they had witnessed. Others lingered, murmuring amongst themselves, still feeling the weight of the moment. Then, the sound of a notification ping echoed from someone's phone. And another. And another. The young woman who had been recording the incident gasped softly as she stared at her screen. Oh my God, she whispered. It's already going viral. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. A video titled, Justice in the Parking Lot, Shaq Stands Up to Privilege, racked up thousands of views in real time. Another post simply read, A stolen spot, a bigger lesson. Watch this. The footage was everywhere, Vanessa's entitled sneer, William's struggle, Gloria's heartbreak, Shaq's calm but firm presence. The world was watching. Reactions poured in. Some were furious at Vanessa's behavior. Others were in awe of how Shaq had handled the situation. But the conversation didn't stop there. People started sharing their own experiences, times they had been overlooked, disrespected, treated as less than. The parking lot moment had become more than just about a stolen space. It had become a reflection of a much bigger issue. News outlets picked it up within hours. Headlines flashed across screens. Former NBA star Shaq steps up against racism in a parking lot showdown. Privilege and accountability, the viral video sparking a nationwide conversation. Not just a parking spot. Why this moment matters. Comment sections buzzed with debate. Some people dismissed it, saying it was blown out of proportion. Others argued that small moments like this were exactly why racism and entitlement still thrived. By the end of the day, celebrities had shared the video. Politicians commented. Organizations issued statements. The shopping center released an official response, supporting Shaq's actions and reaffirming their stance against discrimination. Vanessa Carter's name trended for all the wrong reasons. People dug into her past, exposing previous incidents of entitled behavior. Her social media accounts were bombarded with messages, some angry, some urging her to do better. But Vanessa stayed silent. Meanwhile, Shaq carried on as he always did. He didn't boast about what had happened. He didn't give a dramatic speech. He didn't make himself the center of the story. When reporters eventually tracked him down, shoving microphones in his face, asking him how it felt to be a hero, he simply smiled and shrugged. "Ain't about me," he said. "It's about doing what's right." And with that, he walked away, just as humbly as he had stepped into that parking lot that morning. The moment had passed, but the impact, that was only just beginning. What would you do? This wasn't just a parking lot dispute. It was a mirror reflecting the everyday choices we all face. When injustice unfolds before you, do you speak up or stay silent? Do you scroll past or do you stand for what's right? This story sparked a conversation, but it doesn't end here. It continues with you. Share this. Talk about it. Challenge privilege when you see it. Because change doesn't happen from the sidelines. It happens when ordinary people decide they've seen enough. So next time you witness a moment like this, ask yourself, will you watch or will you step in?